All right, we are going to get started here. Hi everyone, my name is Trent Gill. I work for Campus Manitoba. We are based out of Brandon University, and I'll talk about a little bit what we do shortly here. This is a presentation for Creative Commons use for educators. Specifically for the Manitoba post-secondary system, but also more widely as well. If you're familiar with Creative Commons and open access, a lot of this stuff may seem somewhat familiar to you, but you may also find something of value as well. As you can see on this slide here, we are on Twitter, and I will also provide an email and some websites and some other resources where you can easily get in touch with us. So before I get started, I just want to mention that this is a Creative Commons licensed presentation, most specifically CCBY. So what that means is that all the content of this presentation is licensed with this license. And that means basically I've created this content built upon other people's work, and I'm freely sharing it in this way. And I'm freely sharing it back to anyone who wants to use the content. I've built upon the work of others who have freely shared it with the Commons, and I am using that work to share it back. So if there are any slides that you want to use, copy, or modify, feel free to use and distribute them in any way you want. And you can also do the same with the video as well. I've marked it, or I will mark it as a Creative Commons licensed product once I finished. So as we'll talk about shortly, this license gives you permission ahead of time to engage in these different kinds of activities like reuse and distribution and remixing. And I usually stop to dwell on this a little bit because Creative Commons licenses are really at the heart of what makes open educational resources and open access scholarly publishing open. It makes them more than just free. So the only reason that free is attainable in the first place or in this context is because Creative Commons licenses make it so. By enabling this distribution, sharing, reuse, and revision, it is a legal tool to enable those things. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Campus Manitoba, who we are and what we do. We are a consortium of Manitoba's public post-secondary institutions, and through collaborative projects and shared services, we facilitate student mobility, and we also expand access to post-secondary programs for students in Manitoba. Our basic goal is to provide students the tools to find their educational path, navigate through it, and achieve whatever goals they have. And our strength is really finding solutions that come from collective efforts of Manitoba's post-secondary institutions, our partners. So our public universities and colleges here in Manitoba include Assiniboine Community College, Brandon University, University of Manitoba, University of Winnipeg, University College of the North, and Université de Saint Boniface, and Red River College. And so some of these services that we've built together with our partners include eCourses Manitoba for finding all the online courses available in our province, and Set Your Course, which is an educational pathways and careers website where you can find information about careers and how you can go about getting yourself trained or educated for those careers. And the last logo there you see is Open Ed Manitoba, and that is kind of what we consider our open educational resources umbrella, including anything to do with openly licensed educational projects. So through these services, students are able to get help also through our virtual help desk navigators, and they're available by chat and by phone to anyone who has any questions about what we do. So you can find out more about us on our website at campusmanitoba.ca. We have links to all of our services there, and we also update it regularly with news and announcements, and any kind of presentation like this one goes on there, as well as news about our partners and different kinds of events that are going on in Manitoba. It really is meant to be kind of a hub for the Manitoba post-secondary system. And if you are in that post-secondary system, I highly encourage you to check it out. get in touch with us and help us make it better. So in particular today, I'd like to focus on our Open Ed project. Since 2015, Campus Manitoba has been raising awareness of open educational resources in Manitoba. Our project started in September of 2015 with support from the government of Manitoba to fund the reviews of open textbooks in the Manitoba Open Textbook Collection, which is essentially a port from the BC Campus Open Textbook Collection. And our efforts to promote open educational resources at universities and colleges in Manitoba has continued under this name and our website, Open Ed Manitoba. It includes an open textbook collection that has been widely reviewed by faculty from across Canada. So a number of those reviews are from faculty in British Columbia, from the British Columbia project, which I'll talk about briefly here, and also from Manitoba. So we have a handful of reviewers who have gone through the process and are ensuring the quality of these resources so they can be used in the classroom. It also includes resources for adopting and adapting and creating open educational resources. So whether you're a faculty just looking to use a textbook in a class, or if you're looking to adapt or create, there are resources available there as well. We support the use of open textbooks and open educational resources in Manitoba through outreach and by funding reviews. So we also work with BC Campus. We worked with them to create the website in the first place, and they have supported us in the administrative aspects of our reviews. And we've also joined a kind of informal group called the Canada OER Group, which includes faculty and administration and people across Canada who are looking to promote open educational resources. And that's really how we stay current with what's happening across Canada and basically build upon what others are doing. So if you or your institution would like to get involved in what we're doing, or if you know a faculty member who is working in this area, or they've adopted an open textbook, or they're interested in doing so, you can just visit our website and get in touch with us with that email there. So it's open@campusmanitoba.ca. And we put all of our promotional materials and resources, including slides, videos, anything we create for outreach is available online. So just as a precursor to talking more specifically about Creative Commons, if you've ever heard anyone talk about open educational resources or watched a video or read an article about them, or if you've learned also about open access as well, you've probably come across what we call the 5 R's of open. And this comes from David Wiley, who is a proponent of open educational resources. So essentially, it's a simple introduction to what we mean when we talk about open in this context. And so at the heart of OER, and arguably at the heart of open access, is the permission to do these 5 things. With a resource, the student or faculty should have the permission to freely do any of these actions. And the terms open content, open educational resources, open access, open scholarly publishing, open research, they describe really any copyrightable work that is licensed in a manner that provides users with free and perpetual permissions to engage in these activities. So the right to retain, so you can make, own, and control your own copies of the content in different formats, including downloading, duplicating, storing, and managing. It also includes the right to reuse content in a wide variety of ways. So whether it's in a class, a study group, a website, a video, you can reformat and reuse in any manner that works for your pedagogical or research needs. The right to revise, so you can adapt, adjust, modify, alter the content itself, such as translations, any sorts of editing, any different kinds of use of the material. The right to remix, so including combining the original or revised content with other material to create something new. So this is common in sort of remixing different works. So derivative works are created from putting different ideas together, different content together. As an example, you can consider what open textbooks enable their users to do, so they can adapt it to the learning outcomes of their specific class by leaving out a chapter, or by combining it with another work that maybe has more examples, that kind of thing. The right to redistribute, so you can share copies of the original content, you can share copies of the revisions, or share copies of the remixes with others. And that is what we mean by the 5 R's. So when we talk about the qualities that define or characterize an open educational resource or an openly published scholarly work, we're really talking about the 5 R's: retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. And the mechanism we use to achieve that is Creative Commons licenses. And Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization that provides legal tools for creators to share their work, and publishers who have sort of deemed themselves as open access publishers, or compatible with open educational resources. Creative Commons licenses do not replace copyright. That's somewhat of a misconception. They actually work with copyright and enhance copyright. So whoever creates content and chooses to license it with Creative Commons, for example, someone who writes an open textbook, or someone who writes a scholarly article that they want to be open access, they still own the copyright and the moral rights to that work, the work itself, the textbook, the research article. But they've also put a license on the work that says, you don't need my permission to engage in these actions. I've given you permission ahead of time by choosing a Creative Commons license on my work under these conditions. And there are 4 conditions, or some may call restrictions, that define how you can use a work, how you can control the work. And on the right side of the slide there, you can see what those 4 restrictions are. And Creative Commons creators can apply these to the work that they're sharing. And a little bit later, I'll talk about how open access is sometimes compatible with these restrictions and other times not so much. And more open advocates are arguing that the more open, the better. I know that seems kind of like stating the obvious, but certain restrictions that are put on works do make those works incompatible with other Creative Commons licensed work in kind of esoteric ways. And I'll explain maybe a little bit how that works, but basically it's moving more and more towards the more open the better. So the most basic restriction, which is applied to all Creative Commons licensed works except for what's called CC0, this is known as attribution. So you have to acknowledge that you've gotten the work from somewhere else when you share it forward. So if I have built these slides upon the work of others, I have to acknowledge where I got it from. My work is an adaptation of their work, and I am acknowledging and attributing that creator. The second condition, no derivative works, means that you can copy and redistribute the work, but you can't modify or revise it to suit your own purposes. So this is the most specific one that doesn't quite fit the 5 R's, because it doesn't allow for revisions, it doesn't allow for remixes, and it's somewhat incompatible too with what I would argue is kind of the scholarly method when scholarly work builds upon the research of others. So when it comes to open access, this, in my opinion, doesn't really reflect the goals of sharing scholarly work and sort of hoping to be cited, to be revised, and hoping that your research leads to new discoveries. The third one there, share alike. You can take my work and do whatever you want with it, including revisions and modifications, but you have to share it under the same licensing terms that I've put the original work under. So whenever you make an adaptation, you have to distribute that work, or you can just distribute copies of my work under a license that's identical to the one that I've chosen. So that includes some of the other restrictions if you put those on. The last one, non-commercial, means that you can't use the work to make money. And there are a lot of complexities to this one, and some Creative Commons sort of based businesses are being created around this idea, and that is this one is somewhat incompatible with that notion. But I think there's a lot of good work out there about whether this is a good thing or not. So this legal mechanism provides huge benefits when chosen for the work, and the benefit for faculty and for researchers is that they have full legal rights to customize and contextualize open resources to fit their pedagogical and research needs. So those two broader goals of the academy, pedagogy and research, are sort of really compatible with using Creative Commons licenses. This is a huge advantage. So as I mentioned before, this is a brief overview. It doesn't delve into some of the kind of more complicated scenarios that you might be facing at your various institutions when you're considering how Creative Commons licenses might affect the work that you do. And there are actually a lot of resources online for you to learn about choosing and using a license, what it means for the person who created the work, what it means for the person who owns the work, and what it means for the people who are using the work. And going through some of those questions and asking, how can you get involved in this is really a big step, because the sort of awareness of Creative Commons is slowly growing, and it's becoming more and more prevalent in how we should think about academic work and how it is shared in the public. The licensing process itself is usually quite simple, depending on the scope of the work that you're creating, but essentially it involves a couple of steps, which is to choose a license and apply the license to your content in some way by copying a short code to the work. So you've seen on some of the slides that I've used already that I have an attribution under it, and I've also put the CCBY license badge on most of these slides. And when you've done that, you then can share it on a Creative Commons platform, and these are basically limitless. YouTube, which this live stream is happening on right now, includes an option to make your work CC licensed. If you go down to the description of the video, whatever video it is that you're on, you can see whether it's a standard YouTube license or whether it's a Creative Commons license. And once you click that link, you can find out more information about that license. You can also share, like for example, images on Flickr. Wikipedia is compatible with Creative Commons licenses, and sort of one of the buzzwords that's going around is interoperability, which means that a CC BY license is slowly becoming a universal for this world of open. And that makes the content able to be machine readable and used across a variety of different platforms without these kind of barriers that get in the way of using licensed works. Flickr, sharing images, you can choose to apply a license there. And as you can see here, OpenEd Manitoba, BC Campus, OpenEd, these are basically platforms for open textbooks. And within those collections, you can see how each textbook has a certain set of licenses on it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Creative Commons is the driver and compatible with what we know as open access publishing. So when we talk about open access, we're really talking about access to research and to scholarly work that is shared in the commons and is available to the public and available to all researchers who are looking to do work in that way. And we've seen more and more of a push towards, in Canada, the use of open access as the standard for publicly funded research. So I think it was a couple of years ago that the funding bodies, SSHRC and NSERC in Canada, have put a requirement that all SSHRC or NSERC funded research needs to be available as open access within a certain time frame. And when we talk about open access, we talk about open access to information. So basically the free, immediate online access to the results of scholarly research and the right to use and reuse those results as you need. And the right to use and reuse those results is what's enabled by Creative Commons licenses. And open access really does have the power to transform the way research and scientific inquiry are conducted. It has direct and widespread implications for academia, for science, medicine, industry, and for society as a whole. Open access also has the potential to maximize research investments, increase the exposure and use of published research, facilitate the ability to conduct research across available literature, and enhance the overall advancement of scholarship. Research funding agencies, academic institutions, researchers, scientists, faculty, students, members of the general public, the movement towards open access is increasing in numbers every year. And Open Access Week is really a key opportunity to make all members of the post-secondary community aware of this particular change in how scholarly work is shared, and to take action to keep this momentum moving forward. And the point here is also that open access publishers rely on the use of Creative Commons licenses to make published scholarly work as accessible and reusable as possible. So one example is the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, which is a membership association where all of their publishers comply, or at least have some sort of open access policy in place. And this organization encourages members to use the more open versions of CC BY licenses. So before I was talking about how CC BY and D, SA, and C, those are the more closed versions of the Creative Commons licenses. CC BY, it's not the most open, but the only requirement of using that license is attribution. So for all intents and purposes, it is the most open. And I'm going to summarize a few points from an article on their website called Why CC BY, and I think it does a good job of showing the importance of being aware of licenses and how they work and how they apply to scholarly publishing. So basically, the Open Access Publishing Group has a criteria for membership that a publisher must use a liberal license that encourages reuse and distribution of content. And although they do not require the use of a CC BY license in particular, they do strongly encourage it, and that is more and more common in this area. And what they say in the article is that open access is about more than just access. So in the same way that when we talk about open educational resources, it's not just about free. It's also about how open and how usable it is. Open access is meant to remove access and reuse barriers, and when that happens, it then has the potential to transform the literature into more impactful resource, a more valuable resource for research, education, and innovation. And they argue that to fully realize that potential of open access to research literature, barriers to reuse need to be removed, and barriers to reuse, such as a no derivative clause, is one of those barriers. Not to mention the much more restrictive practices of publishers who are own the copyright and own and retain the copyright to the work. And Creative Commons licenses have emerged as the most effective legal instrument to achieve this. And so instead of transferring rights exclusively to publishers, which is the approach usually followed in subscription publishing, so publishers own the licensing rights and moral rights to the work, and then they share it to university libraries through a subscription model. Under the Creative Commons model, authors grant a non-exclusive license to the publisher to distribute the work, and all users and readers are granted rights to reuse the work. So this non-exclusive clause and the fact that the owner retains the moral rights to the work is an important part of Creative Commons. One of the many benefits of open access publishing is that elements such as figures from a published research article can be reused with attribution as part of teaching material or in other published works without needing to request permission of the publisher. And I think that last part deserves quite a bit of emphasis. The need to request permission of someone, I think, is one of the biggest barriers to the use of scholarly work and the inaccessibility of it as well. I was actually just in a conversation with a former grad student who's now teaching, and now that he's out of grad school, he does not have access to the scholarly research databases in order to continue his work. And I think that's what open access is kind of fighting, is that idea that you need institutional support and institutional affiliation in order to get behind these paywalls and access content you need to do your research. And so what they say in the article is that given the ways in which additional restrictions limit the reach and impact of research outputs, this organization, the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, encourages the use of CC BY licenses, and they discourage one of the more restrictive licenses. And what they say is important for open access, and that's that CC BY is emerging as basically the gold standard for open access publishing. And the 3 largest open access publishers that they are in their organization, they all use this license and have created high quality sustainable businesses with it. As the open access body grows, new services, commercial and non-commercial, will be built on top of open access literature. And they conclude by basically saying that publishers that impose no limit on the reach and impact of the work that they publish, as enshrined by the CC BY license, will be the most attractive option for authors. And this is something that we see moving forward, becoming more and more common. So that is the bulk of the presentation. You can find out more about Open Ed Manitoba by going to our website and by going to campusmanitoba.ca. This has been a very sort of brief presentation, kind of a basic overview of what's going on in Creative Commons and open access. But if you have more questions and you would like to discuss it with us more, go to our website or get us on Twitter, whichever way works for you. Since there's a bit of a delay, I'll just awkwardly pause for a few minutes while people ask questions, and then I can answer those within reason. So thank you for attending, and if you have any questions, let me know.